Hi, I'm Amanda Cogburn. I will be doing the social worker in history presentation, and today I'll be talking about Grace Abbott. So Grace Abbott was involved in so many different things throughout her lifetime, and she had a huge influence in the social work field. So as I do the presentation, I'm going to try and hit some of the main points, but I know there's no way that I could possibly cover everything she's done. But I'll definitely do my best to cover some of the main things that she was involved in between the policy development and just the political system she was involved in as well. So I'm going to start off by just talking a little bit about her background. So she was born in 1878 in Nebraska. So her father was the first lieutenant governor of Nebraska. He was also a well-known abolitionist, and he was a prominent lawyer in his area. And then her mother was one of the leaders of the early plain suffrage movement. She was also an abolitionist. So growing up with these parents that were both very passionate about fighting for social justice had a huge influence on her and her sister Edith Abbott as well. Her sister was also involved in the social work field. Edith was the first woman in American history to become a dean of a major graduate university, which was the University of Chicago. So Grace, she graduated from a local Baptist college in 1898, and she began her teaching career, just teaching at some local schools. She was also doing some graduate work at that time. But a huge move for her was in 1907 when she moved to the University of Chicago to do graduate studies. She did end up graduating from there with a master's degree. Her sister Edith was there at the University of Chicago, and that's who she moved out there with. And then actually her and her sister moved into the Hull House in 1908. So most of us have heard of the Hull House. It was a huge thing for social workers to really start, advocating for that social justice and being there in that communities, and getting out there and working with people. So one of the things at the Hull House, Grace had became involved in the Chicago Immigrants Protective League. So she got involved in 1908. She was the assistant director. Sophia Breckenridge was the director at the time. And then Grace became the director of that in 1909, and she stayed that till 1921. So other things Grace Abbott was involved in, she was also the chief of the U.S. Children's Bureau. She was a member of the Council on Economic Security. She was the first woman to be nominated for a presidential cabinet. She was the Secretary of Labor for Herbert Hoover. She was involved in the Women's Trade Union. She was the first person sent to represent the United States at a committee of the League of Nations. She was the president of the National Conference of Social Work. She was known for her work on the Social Security Act, as well as like the New Deal. So she had tons of involvement throughout her career. So to get into a little bit more detail on a few things, I did want to talk about her work with the Immigrants Protective League. So what she did, they kind of called it like almost like a little immigrant station. And this started out at the Hull House, and she was really passionate about this immigrant population. So she did things even just as helping them to find employment. She had workers that could speak their own language. So when they would come over to the United States, they could meet with someone who spoke their language. They were often able to help connect them with family members that were already over here in the city of Chicago. If they did not have family over here, they would help them to find temporary housing. They helped women to stay out of the human trafficking and to find employment. One thing with the employment is a lot of times the immigrants, they would not get the pay that they were promised at a job. So one of the things that Grace did was really help to advocate for those lost wages, and she had some major wins throughout her time. She would help immigrants to start learning English. She would basically, they were helped with so many different things. One of the cool things about the program they had was they did follow-up visits. So it wasn't just welcome to the United States, let me connect you with family. They would connect it with family, and then, a month later, they would go back to the house to check in and see if there's anything else they could do to help them with. So those follow-up visits were huge. So one of the things that Grace had done as well while working with the Immigrant uh, League was she advocated for federal assistance for them. And getting involved at a more federal level and doing this advocacy, she was able in 1916, the Congress authorized federal funding for the Immigrant Protective League to get their own building. Because, like I said in the beginning, they were just meeting at the whole house. So they were able to get their own building to start providing these services. And then not only did that happen in Chicago, but it happened at several different areas throughout the United States. So it was a huge thing. Now this pretty much became, it wasn't that big. Once World War I started, the immigration slowed down so much that these immigrant stations weren't as important as they were at this time. But, all right, so some of the other things she did, it wasn't just for immigrants that she was advocating, it was for even native-born men and women. She was also very passionate about women and children, like I said, working with the U.S. Children's Bureau. But some of the things she did while she was still in Chicago was advocating for like working wages and the hours of work. So someone had already tried to pass an 8-hour workday and that did not go through. So she was huge in working for the 10-hour work day. And she did that through the Women's Trade Union League. And she also was a huge advocate for the Child Labor Amendment. Now that never got passed, and it was a very controversial amendment, but she had spent a lot of time working and advocating for that. She was very passionate about working with children as well. One act that was established was the Shepard-Towner Act. It was the nation's first public health program for mothers and children. So she was able to get that passed, and that was huge. She also, when she was working with the Children's Bureau and working with the children, one thing that she often did was getting information out to mothers, like information on infants and care and health care and just things that weren't done before. It was making that information public and getting as much out. She would send out articles and all sorts of things just to get that out there. And so she was doing things at this like national level a lot of the time, but she also never lost that passion she had for that direct service too, like working with those individuals one-on-one. So it wasn't just about the policies she was working on and implementing. She was also making sure that the individuals were receiving the benefits of the policies she was working to have implemented. I really liked throughout my research seeing how she took something she was passionate about when she was working with these individuals and then was able to take it up from state levels to federal levels and get these programs implemented. It was really inspiring. So another thing they did, Sophia Breckenridge and Edith Abbott, Grace's sister, had worked on getting public assistance for needy families. They actually designed and implemented the nation's first, it's called the Mother's Pension Law. And this was just at a state level. But with Grace's participation in the New Deal, she was able to get this implemented as a federal program, and it was implemented under the Social Security Act. So she had just such a huge influence on the different programs that were being implemented. So a couple other things, I think I've talked about a few of the major ones. Well, I know she was a big advocate for citizenship. So she kind of really challenged the way people viewed citizenship. Because it wasn't just, oh, if you're born here, you're a citizen. It was, if we're going to have these immigrants come over and we're going to give them citizenship, then they deserve the same rights as native born citizens. And she really challenged that throughout her career. Like I had mentioned, it was huge that she was the Secretary of Labor for Herbert Hoover. She also had received national and international recognition for her leadership in social welfare throughout her lifetime. She had been a member of the League of Nations Advisory Committee on Traffic in Women and Children, and she was involved in different international circles in Geneva and Latin America. She was just very influential anywhere she went. So some of the ways that she had been criticized throughout her career, there was a lot of criticism during her advocacy on the child labor amendment. Like I said, that was a very controversial amendment at the time. So she was criticized by conservative groups and different publications. Some of the publications that criticized her were the American Medical Association, the National Association of Manufacturers, and the Woman Patriot. She was also, when working with the U.S. Children's Bureau, was criticized. Any women working in the U.S. Children's Bureau were criticized at the time, and they were criticized by businessmen, medical establishments, and anti-feminist. The female staff were often called meddling spinsters, and they would say that the Bureau is dedicated to the progress of feminism and socialism, which also were said to be dangerous to politics. The Bureau was also criticized and said that the programs and purposes represented unconstitutional infringements upon the state's rights. So those are just a few different things. Another, the Towner-Shepard Act that she was able to get passed, President Coolidge ended up dismantling that in 1929 during his budget massacre. So, I don't know, throughout the whole research I've done, like I mentioned earlier, I think the most impactful thing that I learned was really just how important it is to not only have that direct service, but then to be involved at the different levels, at a state level, at a federal level, at a national, and then even with Grace at an international level, and how influential she was throughout all of that. Her sister Edith actually wrote, I believe she wrote 3 books, and a 4th book had to be wrote by someone else because Edith had passed away, on all of the work that Grace did. And it has those stories, those personal stories of the people that she helped along the way. And it also has the huge things she did in the political systems and just how that evolved over time. So I just wanted to wrap up the presentation by reading a few quotes that I had found during my research that I feel like really point out the passion that Grace had. So the first one says, she was powerful during the Depression when so much was going on. The next one is the most outspoken advocate of the controversial child labor amendment. And she challenged contemporary concepts of citizenship. The next one is, nonetheless, the forcefulness of Grace Abbott's personality comes through clearly as she advocated tirelessly for programs and policies to benefit children. The last one I have is, her trailblazing social service work has been credited with leading the way to the creation of the Social Security Act and the United Nations UNICEF program. So I just included those because I think that just really kind of sums up the passion that she had, and then we're able to see by looking at her works throughout her life, where that passion took her. And so I've learned a lot doing this. Thank you for listening.